This is your Chapter 5 review for the Unit 2 exam. Chapter 5 is very similar to Chapter 4 in that we are looking at another set of principles, just like the elements that go into an artist's toolbox for working on any work of art, whether it's 2D or 3D. So they're guidelines for artists. They are very instinctive, and they are part of all works of art. So when you think about composition, it is the organization of these elements and the use of these principles. You're looking at two works of art, Matisse here, Pollock on the left, and yet both of them have visual unity. That's our first term, unity and variety. We'll talk about those. So think about what unifies each piece. For this one, think about the use of rectangles, squares, bright colors. For this one, there's a lot of lines and a lot of movement, but it's all lines and movement. So that is also something that unifies the work. Jackson Pollock was radical in taking the canvas off of the wall, working on the floor, dripping, splattering, pouring paint, but it still contains visual unity. He insisted he was not seeking chaos. Everything that he did was intentional. So when the work is complete, it still has a sense of unity, even though there's a lot going on. And Kusama's work might be the quintessential feeling for unity. It's all the same mark, all the same color used over and over again. This was her method of working from the 1950s, and she's revisited it as recently as 2013. So an intense sense of unity in this piece because of the repetition of color, the repetition of a certain mark over and over again. Sometimes works of art can have conceptual unity. It is unity through ideas. So if you look at the piece on the left, everything here relates to human body parts, and the artist is trying to get across the idea that humanity is held together by things other than our physical differences, the size or shape of our ears or our knees or our hands. And for this artist, Joseph Cornell, he's creating a work that is about nostalgia and fantasy, so the objects are different, but they're related in his dream world. Leaves a lot to interpretation. And maybe you remember this artist, Christian Boltanski. This is another piece that has conceptual unity. Each portrait was from a yearbook, so it's not that the students necessarily knew each other, but the idea behind them and what they experienced possibly with regard to the Holocaust, the mirrors that are used, the boxes that are used, the altar, it has a sense of conceptual unity that holds the piece together. Balance is another principle, and it is about weight distributed within a work of art. So the kind of visual weight, how heavy or light forms are in a composition, is something that you can consider. In this case, something three-dimensional. Think about the positive elements, also the negative elements, the opening through the center, and then how he sets things off kilter. It is not natural to think of this square balancing on a single point. So this is a quote from Noguchi: "The essence of sculpture is for me the perception of space, the continuum of our existence." He raises those issues by the color that he uses, setting the object on kilter. And then again, the positive and negative relationship of the circle within the square. This is another work by the artist. This is Mother and Child. So think about the positive and negative spaces. Think about the projections and recessions. It has a sense of balance as a whole. And we can also talk about balance in terms of symmetrical or asymmetrical. So for symmetrical, think of a central axis and the things being the same on the left and right. This work by O'Keeffe has symmetrical balance. It's a little bit soft because it's not perfectly the same as if it's mirrored right to left, but the antlers of the skull are the same on the left and right. But from the top and bottom of the piece, there are things that are a little bit different. So this is how she creates balance. The tree dividing the canvas, the arcs and angles of the antlers, but there's a different weight between the curve of the branch at the top to the right and the weight of the mountain at the bottom of the piece to the left. This has true symmetrical balance. So one side to the other really mirrors each side in this mandala. And for this, it was something of the cosmic realm, so perfect or pure symmetry is something that was essential for communicating the spiritual ideas here. And maybe you remember another piece from the sacred realm earlier that has symmetrical balance. We'll take a look at that in a moment. So a work of art can have symmetrical balance or asymmetrical balance. With asymmetrical balance, any number of these configurations can achieve a sense of balance. Light against dark, texture against smooth, angular elements against, or simple elements against complex. They are all components that can create balance by working together. This is our earlier work that has symmetrical balance. This would be Western, this would be non-Western. So in this work by Klimt, think about one figure against many, the use of light against dark. Think about the patterns that are used, the way that these navigate the shapes and tie them together. These patterns tie this figure as one shape against them. Think about the symbolic element of the crosses that are also part of this emblem of death. These are the sort of things that Klimt is using to create a sense of balance between death and life, which is the title of the work. In this work, you are looking at a Buddhist monk, and the balance is achieved by positive space against negative space. So in the act of what you're looking at in the work, the nothingness is part of meditation. So the meaning in the work even comes across in the way that the artist achieves a sense of balance. For emphasis and subordination, think about where the artist is drawing your attention to. The artist is drawing your attention to these figures in the foreground. They are darker. There's more clarity to them than the shapes that are in the background. The background light creates a sense of contrast. So subordination, the areas in the background, are going to be purposefully less interesting. For Cézanne, you might look at the bright colors of the fruit and the white of the napkin against the much more muted colors in the background. So size and weight can contribute to emphasis. Value can contribute to emphasis. Remember this piece from your homework? Think about the sense of emphasis that Rembrandt was creating. He wanted us to focus on Christ being taken down from the cross. For scale and proportion, scale has to do with size in relation to normal size. So this would be shocking to walk upon a garden trowel that is 10 times, 20 times its normal size. And against the human scale. So the shock of that is something that pop artists were interested in doing. By comparison, proportion has to do with the size of individual parts in relationship to the whole. So the artist Magritte is someone who is interested in, again, setting us off kilter with what we would expect to see and then what we actually see. So we have this element of the sky, but all of a sudden it gets fractured into different cubes. Those cubes echo the way that he has fractured the human form that is in the foreground. And the form itself, each part of the body is right with its own proportion, the proportion of the arms with this torso, but this part of the torso is broken up in proportion with the relationship to the rest of the body, again to set us off kilter. So think about scale and proportion as they relate to a work of art. Bearden is someone also that was part of our homework assignment. Think of how he plays with proportion. Each element of his faces are often cut out from individual elements from magazines and photographs, and yet this head and its proportion to the shoulder, arms, waist of the rest of the body, he's thinking about how he can achieve a sense of balance between those parts, and then the size and proportion of these elements that make up the mother-like figure against the childlike figure. Another very important component of scale is hierarchical scale. So when you make something bigger in art, oftentimes that shows a sense of relative importance. So something made for the chieftain, that central figure that is larger than all the rest, is more important. And remember also the Vitruvian Man from your textbook. I have uploaded this PowerPoint so you can click on this video to watch a link. But during the Renaissance, they revived ideas from the Greeks where balance and proportion, the symmetry in geometry, those ideas about perfection were also applied to ideas about the human form and humanity as a whole. So take a minute to watch that video so you can grasp the concepts that Da Vinci was going for with his Vitruvian Man. Proportion has also had an important role in architecture. So sometimes one of the tools that was used was considered to be the golden section, dividing a length into two unequal segments so that this smaller segment would have the same relationship to the larger segment as the segment is to the whole. It is a big concept visually. We experience it through something like the Parthenon as a work of art. There's a very careful relationship between the distance of each one of the columns that are spaced across the entire distance of the front and sides of each part of the temple. And this sense of proportion is something that was investigated later on by someone like Le Corbusier, who used some of those concepts in relationship to the human form to create a sense of balance in his architecture. So you can see it was not about uniformity like what we saw with the Greeks. He was using some of those concepts but applying them in a new way, using that relationship with the human form for how he created space in his architecture. And lastly, rhythm. We've looked at Maya Lin and some of her work. So the sense of rhythm as you move across this outdoor installation is easy to see. You can see the undulation of the size and shape of each hill, the way that the light moves across it. That rhythm is based in repetition. We feel it in music and poetry and dance. And rhythm can be created in works of art by all kinds of things. So in this piece by Klee, there's a sense of rhythm in the placement and color of the birds, the placement and shape of each one of the silver forms that are the grasses. Rhythm is something that you can probably pick up on easily in a work of art. So at the very end of the chapter, it's kind of a summary using all of those principles when you're looking at a work of art. This is Picasso. You can look at this work and think about how he achieved balance between one side and the other. How is he using things like pattern, value, texture, what unifies the work? And conceptually, we can think about the fact that he would have works like this from the Renaissance, borrowing ideas about vanitas, about life and death, about iconography. This is by Titian. So each one of these three works plays upon similar themes, but they're brought together through the principles of design to communicate in their own time a very similar set of ideas.